Now, back live with Andrew Bolt with the Bolt Report.
Yeah, the Great Barrier Reef, it's like the child hostage of the green movement. Stop whatever you're doing or the kid gets it. Stop cane farming or land clearing or coal ports or shipping or whatever, or I'll shoot. Stop global warming. Now, the ABC tonight starts a three-part series pushing this scaremongering over the reef, again focusing on apocalyptic claims by marine scientist Charlie Veron.
Back in the 1990s, you made some pretty dire predictions.
I predicted that by 2015, the carbon dioxide levels would be so high that it would cause bleaching practically every year.
How did it feel to be right?
It felt horrible to be right. It turned out to be much worse than those predictions.
Joining me is an expert, a prominent geophysicist who was sacked as a professor by James Cook University after questioning just such scares. His case is now going through the courts, and his name is, of course, Peter Ridd. Peter, thank you so much for joining me. Was Charlie Veron right that man-made global warming is killing the Great Barrier Reef, causing bleaching every single year, threatening it with extinction?
No, I mean, this prediction was made in the early 2000s, and in fact, we didn't have any bleaching from about 2002 to 2016. We had a little bit more in 2017, but look, essentially, bleaching is an entirely natural phenomenon, and it's nothing particularly unusual at all. And in fact, there's been a recent paper where we've been able to demonstrate that it's been going on for at least 400 years, and probably, in fact, for about 100 million years.
Well, I actually checked again today. The world's temperature last month, according to satellite monitoring by the University of Alabama at Huntsville, it was just 0.3 degrees above the average record in the 30 years since 1980. Now, an increase of just 0.3 degrees, is that enough to destroy the Great Barrier Reef just like that in front of our eyes?
No, I mean, it's a joke, actually. I mean, the temperature fluctuations on the reef from winter to summer are about 10 degrees. Remember, all the corals that live in the Great Barrier Reef, or a large fraction of them, also live in New Guinea and Thailand, where the temperature is 1 or 2 or 3 degrees hotter. So, a small fraction of a degree is really essentially saying that the reef is so fragile that, anything will just push it over the edge. And in fact, when you look at the history of the reef, it's been through huge upheavals and changes. And I don't think it stacks up that the reef is as fragile as that.
Now, obviously, I haven't seen the whole three-part ABC series. It starts basically as we speak. But from the publicity, it seems to be based around this Charlie Veron, who's the former Australian Institute of Marine Science chief scientist, is now being sold by the ABC as the godfather of coral. While I can't tell, I don't know what he's going to tell the ABC in these three parts, apart from the bit that I've shown. Here he is 7 years ago. Have a listen.
I think of my own children and what it will mean to them. It will mean that they will not have anything remotely like the life that I've had.
What sort of life will they have?
Well, they'll have wars everywhere. The Earth will be plunged into wars everywhere. We are in danger of initiating the 6th world mass extinction because of ocean acidification.
Now, there he is. Charlie Veron seems to be talking about climate wars everywhere, mass extinction. Elsewhere, he suggests the coral could go extinct. He seems to have a very apocalyptic mindset. Is that your experience as well?
Yes, to some extent. I mean, he certainly feels things very deeply, this Charlie, and you've got to respect him for that. But I think that if you look at the data much more objectively, it's nowhere near us. In fact, I make the point that the reef, of all the ecosystems in the world, except for probably the fringes of Antarctica, which are totally untouched, essentially, the reef is one of the least effective ecosystems in the whole world, despite what people are saying. But I think it is true that there's a lot of marine biologists who are very emotional about it, and you've got to sort of respect it because it is a beautiful thing and we don't want it to be damaged. But on the other hand, if people are being emotional, I think it's important that we check what the science is, or the science that they're doing is really as accurate as they claim.
Now, of course, Peter, you were sacked by James Cook University this year for publicly questioning exactly this kind of scaremongering. Where is your court case now up to? Because I note that through a public appeal, I think you got about Australians were so outraged by what happened to you that you got about $260,000 in donations to fund your legal bills. Where is it up to now?
Well, it goes to court. We've got the final date. It's the middle of November, and we'll wait and see what happens. But of course, it's not necessarily the right and the wrong of the matter. It's the the legal details that it'll all be fought on. But we'll see how we go.
And what should your sacking tell us about the information we're getting now from universities and the ABC about global warming?
Well, I'm not so sure about the ABC, but I think there is a problem at universities in general, that academic freedom is in serious trouble, and that we do really have to question not only our universities but our scientific institutions. There is a problem with the reliability of science. In fact, of the $440 million that the federal government's going to spend on supposedly saving the reef, I'd like them to spend just 1% of that to check the science, and it would be 1% very well spent.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that $440 million that the Prime Minister gave to a very tiny group, the Great Barrier Reef Foundation, which hadn't asked for the cash, didn't expect it, and got it without a tender. That massive amount of money to that tiny group, we all want to save the reef, but how did that strike you?
Well, I must confess I'm not so worried about it. I mean, it's not as though that the government is spoilt for choice in terms of organisations, reliable organisations that it can give the money to. It feels it does have to spend the money because it's been effectively blackmailed by the scientific institutions to do that. And in fact, if of all the groups, that foundation is probably better than most because it has a different background. It's actually got people from industry sitting on it who are quite capable of, managing to spend that sort of money, and they may actually do it slightly more efficiently than would otherwise happen with some of the other organisations.
Peter Reid, I'm glad I asked you that question. It's good to get a different perspective on that issue, and thank you so much indeed for your time, Peter Reid.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much.
After the break, the panel and the latest on Malcolm Turnbull's leadership crisis.